Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Analysis. I'm your host, Patel. The Human Rights Watch organization based in New York has entitled a report, Hopeless, Starving and Besieged, detailing the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza by Israeli authorities since October 2023. The 154-page report accuses Israel of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity through systematic and widespread forced displacement, which has affected over 90% of Gaza's population of approximately 1.9 million people. The report highlights that Israeli forces have conducted deliberate demolitions of homes and civilian infrastructure, creating buffer zones and security corridors, which has led to the permanent displacement of people. Despite Israeli claims of ensuring civilian safety, the report documents attack on evacuation routes and designated safe zones, resulting in significant civilian casualties. Human Rights Watch calls for an international action, urging governments to impose targeted sanctions and halt weapons sales to Israel. Judges at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Chief of Defense, Yoav Gallant. The findings are based on interviews with 39 displaced Palestinians, analysis of 184 evacuation orders, and satellite imagery along with verified videos and photographs. The report underscores the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza exacerbated by the tight blockade and the use of starvation as a weapon of war. The report paints a grim picture of the situation in Gaza, calling for urgent international intervention to address the ongoing human rights violations and to ensure accountability for the actions of Israeli authorities. Before we address the key findings, we have this report from our correspondent Noor Mohammed.
Human Rights Watch has accused Israel of committing crimes against humanity in Gaza, alleging the deliberate and massive forced displacement of Palestinian civilians. A new report claims that Israel's evacuation orders have displaced 90% of Gaza's population, 1.9 million people, over the past 13 months, causing devastating harm and violating international laws designed to protect civilians in conflict. Under the Geneva Conventions, displacement is lawful only under exceptional circumstances, but Human Rights Watch argues that Israel's actions fail to meet these standards.
Israel claims that it set up an evacuation system to allow Palestinians, civilians in Gaza to seek safety. But in order to move a civilian population, certain conditions must be met. First of all, it has to be temporary. It can only be until the hostilities are completed. Number two, civilians have to be directed to safer areas where their basic humanitarian needs are met. And thirdly, the civilians can only be evacuated if it's a dire military necessity. And on all three of these, our report and documentation shows that Israel has failed to meet the burden. Therefore, they are committing forced displacement, and because it's pursuant to a state policy, it is a crime against humanity.
Civilians have faced grave dangers during evacuations, with so-called safe zones proving anything but secure. The destruction of civilian infrastructure, including schools and cultural sites, has rendered large areas of Gaza uninhabitable. The report accuses Israel of using forced displacement to create buffer zones, a move that Human Rights Watch says amounts to ethnic cleansing. Comparisons are being drawn to the Nakba of 1948, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced during the creation of the Israeli state.
In addition to forced displacement, there are certain areas in Gaza where the Israeli military has bulldozed entire areas, buffer zones, the Netzarim corridor, areas around the border fence. And in these areas, Palestinians have been displaced, and there's been mass destruction of all civilian infrastructure in those areas. In those areas, Israel has committed ethnic cleansing.
Meanwhile, the Israeli government claims these measures are necessary for military operations and to protect civilians from Hamas fighters. However, critics argue that these justifications do not align with the scale of destruction or the ongoing displacement. International responses are divided. The US State Department has stated that Israel has not breached American laws regarding humanitarian aid, while Human Rights Watch calls for investigations by international criminal courts and sanctions including an arms embargo. As a humanitarian crisis deepens, the world's attention remains fixed on Gaza. For the displaced Palestinians, the struggle to survive and return home grows more desperate by the day.
So joining us to discuss all this is Ahmed Benchemsi, the Advocacy and Communications Director for Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa Division. He's also a career journalist. Welcome to Analysis, Ahmed.
Pleasure to be with you.
So we just heard your colleague openly say that there is ethnic cleansing being committed by the Israeli authorities. Can you tell us what other accusations have been made by your report against the Israeli army and its government?
Well, the main headline is that the report shows that Israel has intentionally caused the mass and forced displacement of the great majority of the civilian population of Gaza, pretty much the almost totality, let's say. According to the UN, 1.9 million people were displaced in Gaza. As of July 15, so the numbers might be even higher now, out of a population of 2.2 million. So that's 1.9 out of 2.2 million. And we have amassed evidence that Israeli officials are committing the war crime of forcible transfer, which is a illegal determination. It's not just like an accusation that we throw like this, or maybe a verbal escalate. No, it is a legal characterization. It is a breach of the Geneva Conventions and a crime against the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. That's why we call it a war crime. A war crime. Now, saying a war crime is not enough, because given the sheer number of Palestinian civilians in Gaza who were driven from their land, and given the manner of their displacement, which has been commented on by my colleague earlier in the show, we concluded that it's not only forced, but also widespread, systematic, and intentional forced displacement, which makes it not just a war crime, but a crime against humanity. That is the main conclusion we reach in our report. I can elaborate further, but this is the main big headline accusation.
Well, it's quite a detailed report. You have obviously done your research quite thoroughly. But the Israeli authorities, as they do consistently against any accusations made against their army or their government, they always say that this is as a result of a deep-seated hatred for Israel, or even, dare I say, anti-Semitism. What do you say to those allegations?
I mean, what can I say? We produced a 154-page long report full of evidence. We analyzed more than like almost 200 displacement orders, Israeli displacement orders. We interviewed repeatedly 39 Palestinians who were internally displaced, many of them, most of them, multiple times. This means following them through their epic journey followed by the Israeli army, sometimes in very difficult conditions, sometimes while it's very hard to reach them because the communications are cut. Sometimes we can reach them, but then they have to scour for food for their children. So we have followed the scattered lives of 39 Palestinians like that for multiple months. We have conducted a very intricate analysis of Israel's evacuation system, analyzed 180, more than that, like evacuation orders one by one, checking whether the order was actually applicable, whether when was it received, in what language, sometimes finding that the order was sent after the attack has started. We have documented the widespread destruction of infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, houses, all of this through satellite imagery. We have reviewed videos and photographs of attacks on designated safe zones and roads, like a road where the Israeli army would push refugees to and then bombard, or a zone it would drive them towards and then bombard. So this is all 154 pages of damning evidence piling one on top of the other. And then the Israeli government spokesman comes out with a tweet saying that we're not credible.
Yeah, indeed. I mean,
I'll let you judge,
Yeah, we have to obviously refer also to the statements of the Israeli Prime Minister and his former defense minister, who have both been charged, also both been indicted for war crimes by the ICC. And in the early days where they spoke about Amalek and also stopping all food, fuel, water, and energy going into the Gaza Strip. So I suppose your role as a human rights advocacy group, an international global advocacy group, which is very well respected, is to look at things dispassionately, regardless of who commits the crime. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This is why we also stated that Hamas has committed war crimes on October 7, 2023, and we even call it a crime against humanity
Sure.
because they did attack, civilians who were unarmed on October 7, including children, including women. So we had absolutely no problem calling that a war crime and also a crime against humanity. I mean, we apply international law, and in this case, the laws of war to all parties. That doesn't mean equivalence. It means simply applying the same laws to everyone. That's what it means. Killing a civilian who is not armed is a war crime under the laws of war, whether this war crime is committed by Hamas or committed by the state of Israel. Now, the state of Israel is very happy when we say that Hamas committed war crimes on October 7, but when we point out their own war crimes, which arguably, statistically at least, have made like dozens times more victims, so we're talking about more than 40,000 identified victims now. And now we're not even talking about those who are still under the rubble. We're talking about the displacement of nearly a full population. We're talking about crimes against humanity. Oh, then we're not credible anymore. So we are credible when we point our finger to their enemy, but we're not credible when we point out their own failings. Our
Okay.
response is that we do not take sides. We take the side of human rights. That is our mission, and we're doing it whether they like it or not.
Okay, and in terms of your mission, so you've now presented the report. We know as I've mentioned just previously, the ICC have issued warrants for the arrest of the current serving Israeli Prime Minister, the first time it's issued any type of warrant for a Western allied leader. As a human rights organization, what do you hope to achieve as a result of releasing this report and also the concurrent actions taking place in the various international bodies such as the ICC and the ICJ?
We're part of a movement, and that is the human rights movement. And the aim of that whole movement is to impose pressure on protagonists of human rights violations. So we move within an international system. The ICC is part of that international system. As soon as the ICC emitted the arrest warrants, we immediately put out a statement, not only saluting the decision by the ICC, but also urging all the governments in the world to strongly support that decision because it goes in the interest of international justice, and that is the ultimate value that we serve. Now, when we issue a report, whether this one or any other one of the more than 150 reports and press communiques and videos and all kinds of products that we have published since a year and a couple of months, our aim is to inflict more and more pressure on the perpetrators and their allies. With this report in particular, in which we document the crime against humanity of massive and widespread and systematic forced displacement, you know what our first recommendation is? I mean, we have like technical and practical recommendations: stop selling weapons to Israel, adopt targeted sanctions, etc. But before all this, you know what our number one recommendation is?
Sure.
Recognize the harm. Recognize the harm. Open your eyes. See the reality for what it is. It is very telling that there was a press briefing by the spokesperson of the United States State Department, and the journalist mentioned our report, this one about forced displacement. And he said, Human Rights Watch said that Israel is committing a crime against humanity of forced displacement. So what do you have to say? And the spokesperson replied, well, we haven't found that. He said something to the effect that we haven't seen that. But of course, if Israel did, then that would be a red line for us. But as far as we know, there's no forced displacement. Well, really, what about these 154 pages of evidence?
Yeah.
I answer them one by one. So this is why our number one recommendation is admit reality. And then once you admit it, condemn it. And then once you condemn it, take relevant measures. Now, is it because we're asking for that to happen that it will? I hope it was that easy. But if we ask for it, if Amnesty asks for it, if the ICJ asks for it, if the ICC asks for it, if of all the governments of goodwill of the earth ask for it, then that means increased pressure against Israel and their number one backer, the United States, and that might lead us somewhere.
Okay, many of our viewers watching this will say it's great that all these organizations are now showing and shining a light on what's really happening, the civilian cost of Israel's genocide in Gaza. However, with an incoming Trump administration and the threats from US congressmen and women about censuring anybody that takes action on the ICC warrants that have been issued, and also anybody effectively that to close the space of people speaking out against the Israel's actions. How does Human Rights Watch, an organization based in New York, position itself to ensure that they can continue speaking out and producing reports like this?
I mean, we are an a US-based organization, but we are an international organization as well. So we're not only based in the US, we have several offices in various parts of the world, and we keep saying what we believe our duty consists in saying. That's all I can tell you. Now, the ICC has, there has been intense Israeli pressure on the ICC to not issue those arrest warrants, including from the US, but not only from the US. I mean, 12 senators have threatened to sanction Karim Khan immediately if he pursued case against Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And by the way, Khan have denounced those threats and noted that the ICC can also prosecute individuals for obstructing justice. So they're not toothless themselves. Also, the Israeli press, Plus 972 magazine, and also the Guardian, the UK, the British magazine, have reported that Israeli officials conducted surveillance on senior ICC officials for 9 years as
Yes.
a secret operation to thwart the court's investigation into Palestine. Back to the US, the House of Representatives passed a bill aimed at imposing sanctions against the ICC. So yes, there is a push against international justice. Well, what can I tell you? We're part of the counter push, or we're part of the push for international justice.
Okay.
And it is an ongoing fight, so we're going to keep fighting it.
Now, do you believe, I mean, you've highlighted, going back to the contents of the report, you've highlighted 39 Palestinians who you've interviewed and got evidence which probably would be up to the legal standard in any Western democracy, I suppose. Do you believe that it could be used in a court, for example, in the UK, for war crimes prosecutions to take place, perhaps by organizations that are advocating for Palestinian rights, or even those advocating for human rights? Is it to that level?
We certainly hope so. I mean, one of our previous reports that documented the use of Israel of starvation as a weapon of war
Yeah.
has been used by the ICJ, by the International Court of Justice, not the ICC, to issue provisional orders to Israel for urgent measures to avoid the commission of the crime of genocide. Now, what did they base these orders on? Several investigations and reports, some they conducted by themselves, and some that the international organizations provided. I suppose they verified, I mean, they did their job. It's the highest court in the world. So I have high confidence in their thoroughness and their seriousness. But the fact is, they used a certain number of reports, including ours on starvation. So that means something. It was useful for something. We certainly used it. Any and each of our reports is used like in a court of law, whether an international court of law or a national court of law based on the universal jurisdiction, to drive justice home, to just push for accountability for those responsible.
And that issue of accountability for those that are responsible is at the heart of what people perceive to be a double standards in applying the rules when it comes to Israel. I mean, we had the Palestinian representative at the UN Security Council saying, is there a separate charter that Israel follows and everybody else has to follow a completely different one, which is the one that's published? In your personal view, I suppose, I mean, you're not speaking on behalf of Human Rights Watch when I ask you this, do you believe that the impunity which many perceive Israel to follow is being challenged through, for example, this report and other measures that are taking place, and also the fact that so many people are now aware globally about what's taking place in Gaza and the West Bank?
I always speak on behalf of Human Rights Watch. Every word I say
Sure.
is on behalf of Human Rights Watch. And I'm going to say that it is absolutely shameful that Israel does not abide by international justice and does not abide by resolutions that have been emitted by the UN. But that's the international system that we got, you know. That system was built after World War II and was based on international cooperation, and it is not a perfect system. It is also based on the political willingness of member states. Like, look at the ICC arrest warrant that was emitted last week. I mean, a lot of people, including ourselves, hailed that as a victory towards justice and the road towards justice. Does that mean that Netanyahu and Gallant will be arrested tomorrow or today? Unfortunately, no, because the ICC don't have their own police forces. So to apply that warrant, the international system relies on the cooperation of state bodies, and then politics come into play, diplomacy comes into play. It is not a straightforward, application of justice as a court, as a national court would do, in a rights respecting country, of course, with police forces at the disposal of the court. No, it's more complicated than that. It's a legal system where justice, international justice, comes into play with international politics and diplomacy, which makes it weaker, but that's the international system that we have. That's the international system that humanity has been able to build after World War II. That's these are the cards we have been dealt. So we're playing them.
And very finally, before we finish, we've come to the end of the segment. In terms of what you hope as Human Rights Watch will happen, for example, in Gaza, in terms of peace, security, and also justice, what do you believe? What reforms do you believe the international system needs to have to make sure that it can deal with the crises of today, as opposed to the ones that it was initially set up to resolve, perhaps after the Second World War?
Oh, wow, that's a deep international political philosophy question. I am not sure I have the answer for that. What can I say? I just hope that there are more and more parties in the world, whether governmental or non-governmental, pressing for accountability and justice. You know, the good thing about the current international system is that the roadmap is clear. The texts are clear. There's no shortage of laws outlining what is good and what is bad. There's no shortage of laws outlining, how to give victims their rights. The problem is not that the laws are unclear; they are very clear, and it's a whole set of international conventions. There are the Geneva Conventions. There is like all the conventions and treaties that form the laws of war
Okay.
and the international humanitarian law. So there's no shortage of laws to apply. What there is a shortage of is political willingness to apply those laws
Okay.
in the world, throughout the world. How do we tackle that? By keeping on the
Okay.
activism, by keeping on the pressure, and
Okay.
by hopefully impacting the mentalities until there are more governments in the world that are ready to play by the international rules.
Ahmed Benchemsi from Human Rights Watch, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I was Mas Patel. This was Analysis, and join us again. Thank you.